Everybody doing?
Great.
Welcome to Crosspoint today. If this is your first time with us, we extend a very warm welcome to you today. I am really excited about the message today because we're going to kind of stay in the same lines that we've been talking about. We're going to do kind of an epilogue to our Chazon messages. One more time, we're going to look at God's plan, God's dream, God's vision for our life. But we're going to look at it this morning from slightly a different angle. And this is the angle that we're going to look at it from this morning. Just like God has a chazon for our life, Satan also has a chazon for our life. Just like God has a vision and a dream for our life, Satan also has a vision and a dream for our life. Just like God has a real mission for our lives, Satan has a shadow mission for our lives. So this morning, we are going to look at this shadow mission. And you know what? When we look at our own lives, and when we look at the world around us, it's very easy to see that this duality exists. Howard Hughes, industrialist, aviator, engineer, film producer, once the world's wealthiest man, gave in to his shadow mission and became a mentally ill recluse with obsessive-compulsive disorder. Kurt Cobain, once a famous lead singer of the band Nirvana, gave into his shadow mission and ended a long fight with drug addiction by committing suicide. Pete Rose, former Major League Baseball player, gave into his shadow mission and was found guilty of gambling on baseball, tax evasion, and was permanently banned from the game. And the list goes on. We could probably come up with another 150, maybe 250 names of people who have kind of given in to their shadow mission. Now, you might say to me this morning, well, Harv, nothing like that could ever happen to me. But the truth of the matter is, all of us are weak in some area. All of us have a besetting sin that could destroy all our lives. All of us have the potential to take the path of least resistance, and the result is that we fall desperately short of what God intended for our lives. In other words, all of us have a shadow mission. Make no mistake, all of us here today have a shadow mission. We are all tempted to let our lives center around something that is unworthy, something that is selfish, something that is dark. I was at a Promise Keepers retreat a few years ago, and one of the leaders, who was a doctor, was a very, very sharp man, and in a very humble and in a very broken way, he shared with us how his shadow mission in life was to watch TV and engage in a destructive, addictive sexual habit while the world goes to hell. We blushed a little bit because his honesty at first made us very uncomfortable. But as he continued to share about his shadow mission and God's work in his life, we all begin to think of how easily a life can deteriorate into the pursuit of a shadow mission. How it can kind of drift into kind of being centered around something that is dark or unworthy or self-centered. And as we begin to share further together, we realize that this can happen to anyone. It can happen to people who attend church. It can happen to whole congregations. It can happen to entire communities. It can happen to entire nations. Come to think of it, it has happened to entire nations. And my friends, it can happen to us. And we see evidence of this all throughout the Bible. Now today, I want us to look at the story of Esther because the characters in this story are given a choice between a real mission or a shadow mission. And in this story, people choose, destinies get formed, and ultimately the world gets changed. The story of Esther is a great story. It takes place while Xerxes is king. He rules over 127 provinces stretching from India to the Nile. He was a man of immense power, and he wanted everyone to know how powerful he was. He was powerful in his position, but he was pitiful in his character. He had very little vision, and he constantly needed other people to help him make up his mind. The first time that we see Xerxes in the book of Esther, he is at a banquet for his noblemen. And the very first chapter of Esther contains 3 banquets. These people like to partay. They have to party all the time. The first banquet lasted for 6 months. Think about that. The Bible says for 180 days, Xerxes displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and the glory of his majesty. The second banquet was for all the common people, so that they could be overwhelmed by the greatness of their king. And the Bible says that wine was served, get this, in goblets of gold, each one different from the other, and they could drink as much wine as they wanted. Unlimited wine to go around. The third banquet that was going on for the women, and Queen Vashti was throwing this banquet, and it was really the only decent banquet that was going on. It was a little bit more like a ladies' tea. The other 2 banquets featured drunken sprawls and unrestrained partying. And we're told that on the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, that's just a kind way of saying when he was drunk as a skunk, he sent for Queen Vashti. He had been showing off all his possessions, and now he wanted to show off his ultimate possession. What do you think he wanted to show them about Queen Vashti? Do you think he wanted to show them her brains? Have her come in and do some math problems. Or her personality. Have her lead a lively discussion about the decline of the Babylonian Empire. No, it says in chapter 1, verse 11, he called her to show the people and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. So you can imagine her humiliation because she knew why she was being summoned. And in verse 12, something extraordinary happens. Vashti says, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go parade myself before a rowdy group of men after 7 days of Miller time. I don't think so. I think I'll just stay home and wash my hair. Well, this doesn't go over very well with the king. And in verse 12 it says, the king became furious and he burned with anger because Vashti was threatening his shadow mission. And this made the king mad. And so here's Xerxes, the king, the most powerful man in the land, and he can't control his own wife. And so what does he do? He turns to the people who always help him make decisions. They were known as sages. And he says to them, what am I going to do about my wife? She's just washed her hair and I can't do a thing with her. And if word of this gets out, you know what's going to happen. All the women will rebel against their husbands. All the women, all the wives will just get out of control. And so these sages, these decision makers, tell Xerxes to issue a royal order that Vashti is not allowed to come and see the king anymore. That's going to be her punishment, which I'm sure just broke her heart because that's what she wasn't doing in the first place. And so these sages say to Xerxes, hey Xerxes, get a new queen. Get a new queen. And in verse 20,